Mr. President, I'd ask unanimous consent to engage in a colloquy with my colleagues for 30 minutes and that those 30 minutes not count against the current 6-hour commitment to debate the amendments on military sexual assault.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I've been a member of this chamber for a while now, and during my time here, few of our colleagues have done more to expose waste and duplication and overspending than our colleague from Oklahoma, Senator Coburn. I'm, of course, cognizant of the fact that Senator McCain, the senior senator from Arizona, has quite a reputation himself in this area. I'm pleased to join them, along with, I anticipate, the junior senator from Arizona, to talk about some really important work that Senator Coburn and his staff have done to help highlight the savings we can find within the Defense Department budget due to duplication and waste and just failure to exercise reasonable management practices like an audit, how we could save money from there and reallocate that money to help our fighting men and women in uniform, help keep our safe and help maintain America's role as a preeminent military leader in the world. But Senator Coburn has pointed out in a new report, I'm sure he'll talk about this, that we could save more than $60 billion by consolidating half the federal government's duplicative programs. I mean, each of these programs has its own overhead, and we could, by consolidation, eliminate that overhead and still make sure that the same amount of money was used to deliver the particular service. For that matter, if we were to consolidate just a third of the renewable energy programs, we could save $5 billion alone. And if we stopped sending unemployment checks to millionaires, then we could save another $30 billion. But I'm a proud defense hawk because I think, you know, we call it the Yellow Pages test in Texas. If you can look in the Yellow Pages and see a service being provided by the private sector, well, you have to ask, why is the government providing that service? But there is no ability of anyone to provide national security except for the federal government. It is the #1 reason for the federal government's existence, and it is a tragedy to see so much money wasted when it's needed so desperately by our military during these very dangerous times. But I have to tell you that it's almost embarrassing. Well, it is embarrassing that the Pentagon cannot even conduct an audit. They don't know where the money is. They don't know how it's being spent, how it's being misspent. So I'm a proud co-sponsor of my colleagues' Audit the Pentagon Act. But right now, I believe the Pentagon isn't scheduled to actually perform an audit until 2017. And I doubt they'll be able to meet that deadline. I'm sure we'll hear more about that from the senator from Oklahoma. Well, there's no good reason why the Pentagon shouldn't be able to tell the American people exactly how it's spending hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayer money. Well, don't get me wrong. If our military needed the money in order to protect the American people and to keep us safe, I would vote for that expenditure 10 times out of 10. But when I'm told that there's money that should be spent helping keep us safe and protect our national security that is wasted through duplicative programs, through inefficiencies, through the inability just simply to manage the hundreds of billions of dollars that the Pentagon manages, it makes me livid. And I think it should all of the American people. Well, we know also that DOD continues to experience serious cost overruns with major acquisition programs. And I know Senator McCain, who in his capacity on the Armed Services Committee has been an eloquent critic of these cost overruns in various acquisition systems. But a 10% reduction in DOD waste could yield an annual savings of $60 billion. $60 billion. That's real money. And that's money that could either be reallocated to pay down the debt or could be reallocated to help fund very important overseas operations by our military in dangerous parts of the world or here at home. So the bottom line is even those of us who are proud national security hawks should be pushing first and foremost to eliminate wasteful defense spending and to audit the Pentagon. In my view, those are just no-brainers. We should not instead continue down the path of wasteful Washington spending and say, well, we don't have enough money, so we're just going to bust the budget caps and the Budget Control Act. We shouldn't say, well, we're not going to address the hard issues of wasteful spending at the Pentagon. We're just going to raise taxes. Those are cop-outs, and we shouldn't go there. With that, I'd like to turn the floor to my good friend from Oklahoma.
Well, I thank the senator from Texas. I've worked on these areas for a long time, and I too am a defense hawk. I'm not often accused of that because I'm critical of wasteful spending in the Pentagon. And let me outline for you, the Pentagon's budget is near $600 billion, counting the extra money for overseas efforts today. Just by auditing the Pentagon, the GAO estimates that the Pentagon in itself will save $25 billion. Now, the only branch of the Pentagon that has come close to an audit so far is the Marine Corps. For every dollar that they're spending now on managing, they're saving $3 in the Marine Corps. So what we have is repeated attempts through the year to address the symptoms of the problems rather than the real problems. Let me outline that for you. The Pentagon has a broken procurement system. And if you think about the programs that have been canceled and the penalties that have been paid because the programs have been canceled, and Senator McCain can talk about some of those better than I ever could, we've never fixed the real problem. And the real problem is what Eisenhower warned against. It's the defense industrial complex. And the only way you will ever solve the procurement problem of major weapon systems is to force the defense providers, the defense industry, to have capital at risk on new weapon systems. In other words, they have to have money in the game. What routinely happens is two things. One is they don't have money in the game, and we start out at cost-plus programming. And then the second problem, which Senator McCain identified with me today and I've long known, is there's never a grown-up in the room when it comes to adding the bells and whistles in terms of the cost. So we have multiple programs. As a matter of fact, half of the major weapon systems that the Pentagon's buying today are on the high-risk list by GAO. So what we have to do is fix the real problems, not continue to treat the symptoms. But let me run through through a list of ways that money that we think, both with GAO, CBO, CRS, in terms of savings in the Pentagon. And these are 10-year numbers, all right? They're not 1 year, but they're 10 years. So you can take any number, and if you instituted this, you'd save 1/10 of what I mentioned. Just consolidation of defense IT structure could save $160 billion over the next 10 years. There are 80,000 employees working on IT for the Pentagon. 80,000. That's twice the population of my hometown. They have more data centers in the Pentagon than we have in all the rest of the government combined. Matter of fact, Senator Bennett and I have co-authored a bill to reduce those data centers. They're not highly utilized. They're very expensive to run. They also put us at a risk for cybersecurity. The other thing that is not mentioned on IT is in weapon system procurement, you have other ITs that aren't even counted in this, managing those procurement programs. If you took the V-22 Osprey that we have on order and replaced it with MH-60 helicopters, which can accomplish almost exactly the same thing, you can save $600 million a year, every year over the next 10 years. Now, Boeing doesn't like that. Boeing and their partner in the contracting doesn't like that. But there hadn't been a weapon system that we've deployed that's had as many problems as the V-22 Osprey. And yet we're going to buy more rather than a proven vehicle, a transport system that can accomplish almost everything that the Osprey can. It's not the latest, it's not the newest, but it actually accomplishes the goals. If you reduce the spending for other procurement programs, and let me tell you why this is important. The Defense Logistics Agency has no idea what they have in inventory. There's a public law that says they will have an inventory. They have ignored it for years. So they've never taken an inventory. It's, quote, too big to take an inventory. There's hundreds of billions of dollars of equipment and parts and supplies at the DLAs, at the depots around the country, that are in excess that we continue to buy new parts for because we don't know we have them. Fix the real problem. That's $52 billion over the next 10 years. If, in fact, you took non-military jobs at the Pentagon that are being filled by uniformed personnel today and replaced them with civilian federal employees, you would save $53 billion over the next 10 years. These do not require a trained soldier to do these jobs. So there's 53, that's $5 billion a year. That's 10% of the sequester on the Pentagon. All we have to do is say, do it. Do it. But we won't do it. If you reduce contractor support and did more stuff internally by the military, and I'll give you a great story. Altus Air Force Base, southwest Oklahoma, C-17 training. The most recent commander down there saved $136 million the first year he tried in running that base. Now, he got the heck kicked out of him for doing it by the higher-ups because they wanted him spending all the money. But what he did is demonstrate on that one base that you had $136 million that you could save on that one base. The question is where's the leadership to do that? So you could save that $53 billion. $37 billion there in terms of decreasing contract support. If you just consolidated the 3 military healthcare services, you'd save $380 million a year. You know, some places we duplicate in the same facilities, at the same locations. We have duplicative military healthcare services. So we could consolidate that, give more consistent care, give better care, and yet save a significant amount of money. The Department of Defense has over 104 science, technology, engineering, and math programs. 104 at Defense. So the government-wide, we have 207. Over half of them are at the Department of Defense. Why 104 from the Department of Defense? Why not one that incentivizes science, technology, engineering, and math? If you consolidated them, you could save $1.7 billion over the next 10 years. That's $170 million a year. What will that do for operation and maintenance budget? What will that do for flying times for our pilots, our fighters? What will it do for the training that's not happening now on people that are deploying to Afghanistan? Those could all happen. Domestic schools, we have 16 bases that still have domestic schools on board, where we run a school by the Pentagon. The cost per student in the United States is $50,000 per student. 5 times what we spend everywhere else in this country on elementary and high school education. If you just ran those in the local school district and paid them $1,000 or $2,000 more than their average cost, you'd save, over the next 10 years, $9.8 billion. You'd save $1 billion a year. If you consolidated the DoD-administered grocery and retail stores, and by the way, Walmart has offered to do that, to offer the same prices, we lose money every year on those, and that doesn't include the cost of running them. And when we've gone out to price things against the grocery store or against Costco or against Walmart or everything else, you can actually buy as cheap in the private sector as you can at a base, PX. So the point is here's a benefit, a perceived benefit, that is costing us a lot of money, but isn't really there. I'd be happy to.
As my friend from Oklahoma knows well, and by the way, I wish every American could have a chance to read this list of wasted and fraud and incredibly misuse of America's tax dollars. But one of the areas that is not in this document that the Senator from Oklahoma and I have talked about is the issue of cost overruns in our weapons systems. For example, the latest aircraft carrier, which was just christened with great fanfare, the Gerald R. Ford, is now run $2 billion overrun, cost overrun of what the original cost estimate was. Now that's for one ship. And when I think about what that $2 billion, it's a cost overrun, could do in my home state of Arizona, it's even more staggering. And yet somehow we let this cost overrun accumulate over a long period of time, and the ship still, by the way, has recently been christened, which does not mean finished, commissioned. And at a hearing we had in the Armed Services Committee the other day, where the effects of sequestration, which I think are devastating, were described by each of the service chiefs, and the Chief of Naval Operation, my old service, said, and we need $500 million more for the Gerald R. Ford. And I was stunned because I said to him, I said, Admiral, there's a $2 billion cost overrun of that ship, and I asked him if anyone had been fired. And his answer, I tell my friend from Oklahoma, was he didn't know if anyone had been fired over the cost overrun of over $2 billion with a request for $500 million more. The senator from Oklahoma said military-industrial complex that the President Eisenhower so wisely spoke about. I would disagree. I think it's a military-industrial congressional complex, because never has Congress ever reversed a program. Never has Congress canceled a program once it has been in full production. So I would ask my friend from Oklahoma, what do we do about what I think is the #1 cost right now in the Pentagon, and that is cost overruns? I could mention the $1 trillion F-35 and many other programs. What's to be done about that?
Well, there's a lot of ideas. Number one is our biggest problem is when we buy, we don't know what we want. So you don't even start the proposal until we really know what we want. That's number one. Number two is there has to be a capital at risk by the person building the ship or building the airplane. So that if the only way to incentivize the private industry to control cost is to make sure half the cost is coming out of their hide. And if you do that, what will happen is you'll see real cost control, because they don't do it on the commercial side. They only do it on the military side. So we don't see. The third thing is having grown up in the room when you decide that you're going to make modifications. You know, the fact is when we think we have an unlimited budget, nobody is there to say you don't have an unlimited budget. You can't add this bell and whistle. Maybe nice, but you don't. There's a great story on that. It was the Army backpack helicopter developed by Honeywell. On time, on price. All right? Here's Honeywell delivering what the Army wanted on time and on price. And the military buyers added bells and whistles. It ended up weighing 12 pounds more, tripling the cost, and delaying the onset to where they finally canceled it. They finally canceled it. Not because the supplier didn't supply it on time and on price, but the military was out of control in terms of what they were asking for. So they didn't get it, so we didn't have the availability to our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, the ability to look behind walls, which was available and on time, but our purchasing system. So you can't worry about the symptoms. You got to change the structure. You got to change the leadership. And I'll make one final point. Right now, we have more admirals than we have ships. At the end of World War II, we had 10,500,000 people under arms. We had over 2,200 general staff officers. Today, we have half that many and 1,500,000 in arms. There's one of your big problems. One of the biggest problems is that we have way too many staff officers, general staff officers, who each have a cadre of people and then protect their turf. Don't protect the country, they protect their turf. And that's not to take anything away from their service. It's human nature. And what we need is a marked reduction in general officers. Yeah, I'd be happy to.
The gentleman mentioned the problem we have of Defense Department running schools that ought to be run by local school districts. It goes even beyond that. Just in the past couple of years, we have absorbed into the defense budget capital maintenance, a new capital building or replacement of schools that are managed by the local district. Several $100 million just in the past couple of years, and obligated for the next several years, will be used to rebuild or refurbish or to maintain schools that are the responsibility of local districts. What has happened is people say, well, the local districts may not be able to afford it, or the Department of Energy, or I'm sorry, Department of Education doesn't have jurisdiction. There's a fat defense budget that we can put it in. And we've seen that in other areas as well. And so the Department of Defense is assuming responsibilities that it just shouldn't have. And when it does, typically the costs are much greater as well. So I take the gentleman's point and just say it's worse than we know, because we've added new responsibilities and new budget items just in the past couple of years.
I just add one thing, and then I'll yield back to my colleagues. Inside the Defense Department, over the next 10 years, we're going to spend approximately $60 billion on things that have nothing to do with defense. And I'll give you 10% of that is research, healthcare research, conducted by the military that doesn't have anything to do with the military. And we have the NIH, the world's premier leading research organization. And we ought to transfer that out of the military back to it. Matter of fact, the guy that started that was a friend of mine, Ted Stevens. And one of the last things he told me in one of my last encounters, he said it was the biggest mistake he ever made, putting medical research into the Pentagon. Because now, you know, it gets funded, and where it should be, we're duplicating things at the Pentagon that we're doing at NIH on diseases like breast cancer, prostate cancer. I happen to have a little experience with that one. The fact is we're not spending the money wisely. We're spending money that we don't have, duplicating things that we're already spending money on. So I would yield back to my senior colleague from Texas.
I would ask the Senator from Oklahoma, isn't it true that you have the materials that Senator McCain referred to posted on your website?
I do.
And what is, if people are interested?
Coburn.senate.gov.
And they can get that same information?
Everything that we have, every study we've published, all the waste, all the duplication. I just add one other thing. There's at least $200 billion a year that the GAO, not Tom Coburn, has identified in waste and duplication in the federal government. And we've not acted. Only one committee in Congress, the Labor and Workforce in the House, has acted on one of those recommendations as far as duplication. So the problem is us.
I would ask the senior senator from Arizona, as we discussed, you've been a critic and pointed out waste in the procurement process. But I know the military in designing state-of-the-art weapon systems, the F-35, for example, they build in this notion of concurrency where they actually are designing it while they're building it, which creates cost overrun challenges. But I know you were also instrumental in finally getting the Pentagon to negotiate a fixed price contract. Could you talk a little bit about some of the challenges?
Well, for years, I'd say to my friend from Texas that the cost overruns went unchecked. If someone has a roof that leaks and hires someone to fix the roof on a cost-plus contract, I guarantee you the cost to have your roof fixed will probably exceed the initial estimate that the roof fixer provides you with. And so when we go into cost-plus contracting, which is justified by many of the contractors by saying, well, we're not sure what the additional costs will be. Well, they don't seem to have difficulty once those contracts are fixed cost. But the best example, best or worst example I can tell my friend from Texas is the original effort to replace Marine One, the presidential helicopter. And this helicopter, over a period of a couple of years, went from requirement to requirement to requirement to requirement to the point where there was even a requirement that the helicopter could withstand a nuclear blast. And it ended up, before it was even off the drawing board, at a greater cost than Air Force One. Greater cost than Air Force One. So finally, they had the good sense to scrap it, and we still are using the old reliable helicopter, which seems to be fairly suited the purpose of transporting the president around in a helicopter. Another interesting story was this: the Air Force now believes that one of their primary acquisitions has got to be a long-range bomber, and we're starting in this process again. And at one point, there was a proposal to put a kitchenette, I'm not making this up, a kitchenette into the long-range advanced Air Force bomber. Finally, someone decided, well, maybe that doesn't look too good to have a kitchenette on, on this airplane. But that's the case of what happens in the system we have today. And God knows the chairman, Senator Levin, and I and other members of the Armed Services Committee have gone time after time after time to try to bring these costs under control. And I guess one of the favorite stories is the famous Kelly Johnson of the Skunk Works of the old Lockheed team. They went out in the desert of Nevada and came back 7 weeks later with the SR-71. Now it takes decades, literally decades, to come forward with a weapon system, and never once in recent years that I can recall has there been a weapon system on time and on cost. So then you understand, I say to my friend from Texas, where the industry, defense industry, is so important and vital to the economy of his state, as it is with mine. The Apache helicopter, which I'm very proud of, is built out in the East Valley of Phoenix, Arizona. But the American people then become cynical about defense spending. And that really does erode our ability to sponsor and support those requirements that are so badly needed. So I thank the senator from Oklahoma for all he has done to continue to bring this to the American people's attention. And I just want to make one additional comment about this medical research. There isn't a person that I know in America that doesn't support research, medical research, particularly cancer is one of the big projects that we appropriate money for. But it's the classic Willie Sutton syndrome. What in the world does the Defense Department have to do with cancer research? It's the Willie Sutton syndrome. When they asked Willie why he robbed banks, he said, because that's where the money is. So we're robbing the defense appropriations for programs and projects that have nothing to do with defense, but because the money is there, we are spending it. Meanwhile, we do not have, particularly as a result of sequestration, adequate funding, in my ability, that will prevent us from, that will enable us to continue to defend this nation. So all of us are for medical research. I don't know anybody in the world that isn't. But for us to take money out of defense appropriations and put it into medical research is something that is not any way justified except for the fact that the money is there.
Mr. President, how much time is remaining?
1 minute and 40 seconds
I
remaining.
yield the remaining time to the junior senator from Arizona.
Well, I thank the gentleman. This has been interesting in the area of money being used where it shouldn't be. I gave the example last week on the floor, and I'm making a habit of coming down every week and speaking for at least 5 minutes on waste and duplication in government. But I talked a couple of weeks ago about the Department of Agriculture. Department of Agriculture, this is the Department of Agriculture, but you wouldn't know it when you look at some of the programs run by the Department of Agriculture. One, they have a single-family housing direct and guaranteed loan program in the Department of Agriculture. It provides zero down payment mortgage loans. It's cost the taxpayer about $10 billion since 2006. That's the Department of Agriculture running a housing program. We see this all over government, and it's wrong. Just the duplication, as Senator Coburn, the senator from Oklahoma, has spoken of many, many times, could save our government and the taxpayer billions and billions of dollars a year. So I appreciate my colleagues this colloquy that we've had, and look forward to more of them. Thank the gentleman.
Mr. President, we yield back the remainder of